kind of populist types who just like to pin, oh, we'll banish Freemasonry, you know. And what's very sad is that Steve Bannon is chums with that whole project, and Farage. This populist let's destroy European Union movement is now saying, oh, well, let's destroy Freemasonry as well, might as well whilst we're at it. The danger with that, of course, is that it's been tried before. It's what the fascists did under Mussolini. He abolished the Italian lodges. And why? Because he wanted power to himself and the fascist party, which, you know, he wanted to suppress independence of thought. So I'm not having intellectuals, middle-class types meeting in, you know, Palermo without my authority. No, we abolished them. Well, unfortunately, look where that led, because before you know it, you know, they're rounding up the Jews. And it was the same in Germany. Hitler abolished Freemasonry, even though it was one of the forces that had led to the German Enlightenment and you know, the spread of authentic intellectual activity in Germany. Goethe was, of course, one of the most important of the Freemasons, but there were many others. And it was true also in Spain, where the Republican government was, where many Freemasons were involved. They were the intellectual backbone of the Spanish, you know, intelligentsia. But Franco had a hatred for Freemasonry. And that's one of the reasons he did his fascist uprising and declared war on the democratically elected Republican government. And he then, you know, went to war against it because he hated Freemasons. Because at that time in the right-wing Catholic Church in Spain, there was an anti-Freemasonic kind of movement going on, which was tied in with anti-Semitism. And it was very extreme. You know, these people are secretly Jews, we've got to kill them all. It was tied in with anti-socialism and anti-communism. And it was fighting what it saw as an occult war against Freemasonry in the name of Holy Mother Church. And Franco was a soldier in that fight. Unfortunately, you know, it means you have to kill all the intellectuals. Because, you know, if you start killing the Freemasons or putting them in prisons, as Franco and Hitler and Mussolini did, then they actually killed them. I've been around Auschwitz and Dachau and places. They rounded up the Freemasons and literally killed them. And it was part of their anti-Semitism, because you hate the Jews because they're also intellectuals. Most Jews are brilliant people, savants from many, many centuries of learning. You know, look at Marx. He had a family tree of rabbis in Trier going back centuries and elsewhere in the Rhineland. And so, and in Worms, which was where Rashi also taught, the great French rabbi. So, again, great Jewish thinkers have been working on the joined-upness of things for literally millennia. And that's the idea behind their proposition about God. God is the ultimate joined-upness of everything. And so our duty as intellectuals is to find that and love it and worship it and you know, make that known. That was St. Paul's vision in his own way, you know, crazy Jewish mystic Christian, who glimpsed that joined-upness. It was Christ's vision as well. It's my vision. I want a world in which these crazy joined-upness mystics can freely work, mingle, teach, study, and visit each other's countries. That's why I like the European Union. It's a place where we can all go on doing that. And I'm opposing the kind of right-wing nutters who will abolish Freemasonry, and no doubt they'll be shutting intellectuals down soon. I mean, for God's sake, that's really to betray our heritage as Europeans. This is the continent of Plato and Pythagoras, the continent of Virgil, and the continent of Goethe, and Francis Bacon, and Sir Isaac Newton, and, you know, Kant, and Marx. You know, this is a place where people come to think, and think deeply. It's the continent of Abelard. Okay, so that's why I'm proud to be here representing the World Intellectual Forum in Europe. I want to mention Trump's visit to England and being met by the Queen and all that. I think personally, I don't think Trump is an intellectual. I think he's an anti-intellectual. I think where he's coming from politically is he's a businessman. He's the worst nightmare of Eleanor Roosevelt, whose autobiography I read recently, and who says her husband was a very good president who helped in the Second World War and designed the United Nations. And Roosevelt, both would be turning in their grave at Trump, because she says in her autobiography, God, I've met businessmen, they're ruthless, she says. If ever a businessman got in to be president, it would be a nightmare. They don't have any ethics. Thank God my husband is president. At least he's, got some vision, got some ethics. In other words, he was an intellectual. Franklin was a sort of intellectual. And and whereas Trump isn't, he has no joined upness. He just responds by Twitter to whatever the issues of the day. You can't be an intellectual through Twitter. With all due respect, it's a joke. I respect the UK has to give him some kind of, welcome, but I do think that, oh dear, I think the best thing they could do is send, I know he's going to visit Westminster Abbey. I hope the Dean takes him aside and gives him a bit of Bible study and makes him actually read Galatians or one of the classic texts of Christianity. Because Trump is a disgrace and a shame bringer to the true liberal traditions of North America and Europe and what they call Western civilization, although the nomenclature always strikes me as odd because, is Greece Western? No, it's Eastern. I mean, the Balkans is Eastern. So we're talking the global values that underpin all civilizations, be it Islamic, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, whatever, or humanist and anchored in classical paganism. Trump, should go off and do a degree, in my opinion, when he comes out of office. And if he ends up in prison, then he'll have time to listen to all my talks. I have nothing against him personally. He's probably a very entertaining character. But he shouldn't be in that kind of office with such ill preparation. Yes, I can go on about that. I mean, I understand he's going to Portsmouth also in a few days' time to join in a D-Day commemorative ceremony. And there's some people who are campaigning that he shouldn't go, and they think it's a disgrace. Well, I kind of sympathise with those people. I nursed people who'd been in D-Day. It's what got me active as a peace thinker. I'd be just an intellectual. I'd be stuck in my books if I hadn't actually met people who'd fought on the beaches in D-Day and in World War One and told me, Thomas, war is horrendous. You have to stop World War III. And I took that mission. That's why I'm not just a scholar. I'm a scholar activist, or an intellectivist, as I've coined the word. And so I think it's wrong because what Trump is doing is he's been, and his advisors, Bannon and co, have been kind of scratching away to re-spark the conflicts in Europe. If we start dismantling the European Union, God knows where that will lead. If populism and nationalism replaces the rhetoric of unity and federalism and integrative European continent-wide policy formation, which is sensitive to every nation and culture's needs, but at the same time, doesn't allow sort of war-making and the rhetoric of violence to occur, then I think we're in danger, and that's my problem with Trumpery. So, as a European intellectual, I say to Trump, you're welcome to Britain, and I hope you enjoy your visit, and I hope you do some study in Westminster Abbey. Go into the Jerusalem chamber, where I've organised a conference on peace in the Balkans some years ago now. Do some deep reflection. It's where Henry VI died, and it's a beautiful inner chamber inside Westminster Abbey, where, with the permission of the Dean, I once chaired a conference on interfaith peacemaking in the Balkans. We need to be doing peace, Mr. Trump, and Westminster Abbey stands for that. And your policies are not, commensurate with that highest vision. Although I think your instinct is, you want to do the right thing, you want to find peace. Well, okay, so build the top floor of the Pentagon, build the Nonagon, and, I'll forgive you for a lot of the other rhetoric. Okay, moving on, I want to mention the fact that yesterday was Justin Martyr's Day. He was the first Christian intellectual, really. I mentioned Thomas, but he was the next generation. He was the first philosopher who became a Christian. Justin Martyr, or Justin, lived from 100 to 165. He was from Nablus, or Shechem, which is now part of the Palestinian territories. Parents were Greek, and he was educated in rhetoric, poetry and history, and then he started studying philosophy, so, you know, a proper intellectual. He studied philosophy at Ephesus and Alexandria. I've been to Ephesus. What an extraordinary city it was and must be in those days. He joined in turn the schools of the Stoics, the Pythagoreans and the Platonists. In other words, he was a real polymath, right? And then he became a Christian in 130 AD approximately. And he's regarded as the first Christian philosopher. Well, I take my hat off to him because, you see, all those classical traditions were commensurate with Christianity at its best. He was wise enough to have worked out that all those great classical traditions like Stoicism and Platonism and Aristotelianism pointed to the Logos, pointed to that transcendental coexistence of the divine sphere, the sphere of the Logos, with our human mundane problems. And that Christ was the bridge builder, if you want. I mean, the Pontifex Maximus is the great bridge builder. The Pope uses the term. It was the term of the chief priest of Rome, which was ultimately an Etruscan concept. And so Christ was that bridge builder. And that's what Paul was explaining from his own philosophical vocabulary that was largely Stoic inspired, as it was for Justin Martyr. So, unfortunately, he was then killed. He wrote 2 apologies and a dialogue, which explain what Christianity is and try and make it explicable rationally as a philosopher. And he thought that this conflict between pagans and Christians could be resolved if only they'd like to sit down and understand. Of course, he's right. Still, I believe as a philosopher that the conflict between every religion can be resolved if only we use reason but also spirituality. We can't just use reason in a narrow sense. It has to be a divinely infused spirituality, which as Druids we call Arwen, the divine inspiration from the 3 drops of Ceridwen. Anyway, he was killed. He was tried and then confessed to being a Christian. He was sacrificed and killed, to death. So, and his feast day is the 1st of June, which we've just had. So hats off to Justin. May many Justins come up, and in all faiths. We have to have enough of these philosophers in all faiths speaking about peace, speaking about using reason, about using evidence and argument. And we need to update the narratives of these religions because there's no need for them to be in war situations. That's why I've drafted the Interfaith Peace Treaty. It's the only interreligious peace treaty that anyone's thought of on the planet, which I've drafted. It's a complex philosophical text, 43 paragraphs. Justin Martyr would be the first to sign it where he's still alive. So read it. It's got its own website. From what I'm saying, you'll understand why, as an intellectual, I can't accept the premises on which Brexit is being foisted onto the British people, particularly the Scottish and Irish people, the Welsh. We are too sophisticated people for this nonsense that Farage and his Goebbels-like monopoly of rhetoric is trotting out. We have to see through this nonsense for what it is, which is shallow, repetitive, bitter, twisted and hate-filled. And the fact that he's always laughing is just because he's being funded to the tune of millions by corrupt businessmen who ignorantly think it's going to be good for their personal pockets after Brexit. Well, it may be, but it's going to be very bad for the collective pocket of the United Kingdom as a whole, and that's my concern. As a thinker who cares about society as a whole, and that's one definition of what a socialist is, it's someone that looks at the bigger picture, then Brexit makes no sense at all. It's like a demonic project dreamt up by sad and bitter and twisted fallen angels. And I would just say to them, go back to some other place. You don't belong on this planet. And the United Kingdom is too precious. It is a project that needs to stay together, and so is the European Union. I've also been doing a lot of work on Druid studies, and giving a talk in August in Slovenia about that, and I will be publishing a book soon about my work in Druid studies, which remains, very precious to me. And it's important on a pan-European level because I've discovered, I knew intuitively, but I've discovered in detail and factually how how the whole of Gaul, the whole of the Rhineland, the whole of Austria and Switzerland, northern Italy, northern Spain, these were very, very important Druid centres. And so the discoveries archaeologists have made over the last 100 years are incredible. They find graves in the Champagne region of France with men and women buried in their chariots or in these carts with four wheels, as if they're going journeying on into the afterlife. They were buried with grave goods of great sumptuous beauty, gold torques, rings, jewellery if you're a woman, and incredible banqueting objects, feasting flagons, gold cups, all kinds of things, often imported from the Etruscans. The Celts and the Etruscans were like best buddies, right? And they've discovered an Etruscan port in the south of France near Montpellier called Latera, where they were importing a lot of this stuff. And they were exchanging ideas. So we know the Etruscans were the most religious of all the Italian people, and the Druids were the religious experts of the whole of the Celtic world. So, of course, Etruscan priests and Druids were like best buddies, sharing ideas and things. Now, that's what should still be happening in Europe. That's why I'm going around giving talks and stuff. And that Druid wisdom has not gone away. I've just been recording a commentary on Paul's letter to the Galatians, who were a Druid Celtic civilization in Turkey, in Anatolia. They'd been there since 300 BC and probably earlier. The modern city of Ankara, the capital of Turkey, was a Druid foundation, as was Milan. So these Celts used to get about, and they were convinced of the interpenetration of all worlds. The metaphysical basis of Druidry is the same as all the other world systems, but it has a certain spin on it. It sees life in terms of a spiral rather than a circle. So unlike Nietzsche, who was locked in this rather sad sort of eternal return circle idea which drove him mad, the Druids are spiral people. When you come back round, you go up a little higher each time. And that's why in Gavrinis, off the coast of Brittany, and these other sacred sites, these Celts engraved these incredible spiral shapes. And they later put them in their Gospels, in the Lindisfarne Gospels, the Book of Kells, and so on. It's that amazing spiral form that is the metaphysics of Druidry, as I'm explaining in some of my publications. So, yeah, we need to remember that. If in your life, it seems like you keep repeating and making the same mistakes, well, no. Each time, hopefully, you get a little wiser and a bit closer to the love that is the constant light that draws us in like moths to the flame. So I want to just honour, as European intellectual, the work of Abelard. I just want to mention him because this tragic destruction of Notre Dame's cathedral roof, what to do, how to rebuild it. Abelard was, the great intellectual that founded really the University of Paris, which in turn founded the University of Oxford and Vienna and Cambridge and all the other European universities. It was Abelard's having the courage to stand up and use reason to question the biblical teachings that enabled all that miracle to happen. He'd read Aristotle, you see, and he had Aristotle in one hand, the Bible in another, and he said, how do we reconcile these two things, this logic system and this faith system? Well, that, my friends, is the big question. He had tremendous courage to do it. Unfortunately, he fell in love with one of his students, and as we know, the romantic story. And, it's a shame he just didn't marry her and they lived happily ever after. She was also a very clever woman, Eloise, and they could have had a happy wisdom affair and a marriage. But unfortunately, her father didn't like this whole project, and it all ended in tears. But what happened towards the end of Abelard's life is he took refuge in Cluny, which was the greatest intellectual powerhouse of France, apart from Paris, which was just developing. And in Cluny, he was great friends with the abbot, who gave him sanctuary, because the church, whipped up by fanatics, was saying Abelard was a heretic. They didn't realise the importance of reason. They didn't realise the importance of intellectuals to faith. The intellectual isn't a challenge to faith, it's a tester and a prover of faith, which is Abelard's point. So, anyway, Cluny was big enough to stand up to King of France or whoever was coming after him, or the Pope. And in the same abbey in Cluny, they were also translating the Quran for the first time into a European language, into Latin. That's where finally the Quran was translated by the abbot of Cluny, Hugh, who had a vision, what could have been Peter the Venerable, there was a succession of them, who had a vision that we can replace violence in Europe with scholarship. And instead of all the crusades that were waging at the time, how about just studying each other's writings and sacred books? How about having colloquia of Islamic scholars and Christian scholars and Jewish scholars? Let's discuss the respective rights of each, and let's apply universal reason to them all. Well, that was the project of Cluny, and it was the project of Abelard. And if only they'd have listened, the Crusades would have transmigrated into like something very different, cultural holiday tourism. So that you go to Jerusalem and you experience the sights and sounds and you learn about Sufis and you learn about Judaism and you come home enlightened. That's what we should have now, cultural, intellectual tourism of a high level. And instead we've had to go through, nearly 1,000 years of war and fighting and killing and intellectual war games. Well, I'm saying, folks, it's time to stop all that. European Union can play a part, the UN can play a part. Countries like the United Kingdom, if it manages to stay together and escape from this nightmare of Brexit, can then set up an inter-country peace ministry, like for the Scottish, Welsh, Northern Irish and English peoples. I think the House of Lords should be replaced by some kind of Senate which has regional representation, but not on a party basis. I think it should be the intellectuals of Britain that should become senators and replace the Lords. So anyway, I'm going to stop there and commend you to God and this coming week. Yes, this work of intellectuals is important. Please join us. Do some thinking. Do some joining up of the big picture, the big ideas. And that's how we're going to get peace on this planet. Because peace, by the way, the word means to pact, to interconnect. Peace is the Latin goddess, Pax, and her name is the interconnectedness of things. A pact is what you make, two people. And so we need more joined upness, more interconnectedness to get that peace. Okay, thank you for listening. I was going to do a song. Let me just finish, if I may, if there's any time left. I'm going to do a little song because music is important. From 1,000 miles to bring you the news. I come from 1,000 miles
pieces are need to find pieces are in your mind, don't go the way of fear. Go the way of love. Don't go the way of war. Go the way of mind into mind, seeing mysteries, heart into heart, seeing histories, soul into soul, seeing light, seeing light, seeing one light, seeing light, seeing